Greetings and salutations. Welcome to Knife Chats with Tobias. One of the things I really like about collecting old knives is when you basically stumble across a knife you've never seen before. And there are a lot of knives out there that I have never seen before. And I saw this one, it's like, wow, that is really cool. I like to collect camp knives, and this is something, like I said, I've never seen before. The only clue I had on this was KL, and I knew that KL was most likely not a person's initials. Because I've seen other knives with KL on them, but typically those knives that I saw were a Victorinox model of knife, basically the Pioneer. This is the Swiss soldier's knife. Well, the KL knives were Dutch Army knives, but they looked like the Swiss soldier's knife, only they typically had a key ring down here, so they were closer in line with your standard Pioneer, but they would be marked KL for Dutch Army. It's like, I don't know how to pronounce the actual words for what this is, but you'll see it down here. It basically translates to Royal Land Forces of the Dutch Army. So this stands for the Royal Land Forces. So the K is, king or something, and L is for land forces. In any case, it's a really cool knife. I had no idea how old it was or anything like that, but I figured it must be older than these knives. So I went ahead and grabbed it, and it's in really surprisingly good shape, especially when I figured out how old it is. What you have on it are similar blades that you have on the Swiss soldier's knife and also the Army's, the U.S. Army's demo knife. So because it is a camp knife, it basically all of these evolved from a camp knife. This also evolved from the camp knife. Was this the original camp knife? Who knows. In any case, this is definitely an interesting camp knife, and it's a really cool Dutch Army knife. You have your spear point blade here, not in the best of shapes, but it is almost a full blade. But you can see it was not properly sharpened, but it was sharpened by somebody, probably a Dutch soldier who wasn't a big knife guy. And probably looks like it might have been sharpened on a grinder, or maybe they used a file or sandpaper or something with it. I'm going to see if I can buff out some of that. But the other thing you see here is the company that made it. That is AMEFA, AMEFA, and then there's a star on either side of there. And those are the only markings on here. But what I was able to deduce from looking around, this knife is known as the M1952 Dutch Army knife. So I'm assuming that it came out in 1952, and the later Dutch Army knives that are based off of the Victorinox Pioneer, those knives started getting made around 1983. So I think this knife was in service with the Dutch Army from around 1952 to about 1983. Which would be a pretty long time in service, especially when you see some of the blades on here. We have seen this blade, the Spearmaster blade, and then it's got this really interesting punch or awl, and it is just a very short little awl. Look at that, and it's triangular. So this is a very old-fashioned awl going on here, and you're going to see something else that is pretty old-fashioned too. And it is probably the shortest awl I've seen on a knife like this. This is the triangular awl that was used by the Swiss Army, the Swiss soldier's knife. This one is from, I think, 1944, but they were still using this knife up until about, I think, 1961 or 1962, somewhere around there. This happened to be made in 44 though. And then this is the awl that you see on the American, the demo knife, or the 818K. The utility knife used by the U.S. military, and this was by all branches, and you can see the difference there with that too. So that's pretty cool. But the other blades, well, you've got a short flathead screwdriver with a cap lifter going on here, and on the Swiss soldier's knife, they just use a flathead screwdriver on their knife all the way up until they switched over to the soldier's knife, and that is when they finally ended up getting the cap lifter added to their knife. Up until that time, they just had the flathead screwdriver. So this screwdriver with the bottle opener or cap lifter was probably a little more useful than the one on the Swiss soldier's knife. And then finally, you have over here, this is the one on the American knife, and you can see that that is a much longer screwdriver than either of them, which is nice. And this also has the cap lifter, so you can see right there, much longer screwdriver on there. This particular one is from 1967. In 72 or 73, somewhere around there, they got rid of the little thumb stud on the screwdriver here. But in any case, back to this knife. As you can see, I probably need to clean this a bit. There is really very little action on the screwdriver left. It definitely locks when you're closing it, but or locks when you're opening it. But when you're closing it, it's pretty lazy. Very little snap. I'm gonna have to definitely clean it up. But this is the cool thing. It has got that very old style of can opener, the one that is just a punch basically, and you use the knob here for cutting up. So you push it into the can, and then you rock like so, cutting upwards to open the can. I've demonstrated that with a similar knife in the past, but this is one of the older styles of can openers that really stopped being used after World War II. But for some reason, it remained on the Dutch Army knife. And like I said, this one was probably made from about 1952 to 1983. I know I have seen many of these that actually have the date marked on it as well. I don't know when they started putting the date on the knives, or maybe this knife wasn't an actual issue knife. I don't know. What I do know is the Dutch Army did use a knife like this, and it did have covers very much like this, which are kind of a fiber scale of some kind. I don't know exactly what it is, but it reminds me very much of the fiber scales that were used on the Swiss soldiers' knives. So how good is the quality of them? Well, this one's pretty good. It's still holding up. And if this one is from like the 1950s or so, it's doing really well too. The interesting thing, you can see here, this one is steel in between here. This is also steel, but they have used brass liners going in there in between the very thick back springs going on there. And then it has this squared off little clevis down at the end here, which is kind of nice because when you press it down, it's flat. So if you're dropping this in your pocket, the clevis is going to be out of the way, unlike what you have with these where, you know, it's got a little more bump there. See how much that sticks out versus this? That is kind of flush with the bottom. Whereas this one, you got a little bit of discomfort there. I don't know, little bird's eye rivet up front. Got the KL cut in there. I don't know. I saw it and it was like, man, that is really cool. And what really, the first thing that caught my eye though was just this little punch here. And I was really taken aback by that. It's like, that is so cool. I want that knife because of the punch. So I put in a bid. No one else bid on it, and I ended up with it at a really nice price. And then, man, that is such a cool can opener. All in all, just very impressive knife. The other thing is, look at the distal tapering on that blade. That is so neat, the way it just drops. Gets thinner all the way down, and it is locked up tight. And so the knife is most likely, somewhere between, made sometime between 1983 and 1952. So that would mean it's somewhere between 73 and 42 years old, if that estimation is right. You know, if it was actually made during that time period. I don't know 100% if that is the case, but that is my best guess. Now, if someone out there has a better guess, or if someone out there knows more about these knives, and I'm sure there's people out there who do, because I know nothing about Dutch Army knives other than the little bit you've heard so far, which isn't very much. But if someone out there could help me out with this a little bit, I would really appreciate it. Man, I just noticed that too. Notice how the back is there, the way they got the cutout there, and then they got a little bit of a cutout there, and then it drops in for the thumb stud there. But you can open it either with the thumb stud, which really isn't a thumb stud. This is actually part of the can opener portion, so that you can actually rock it on the can while you're opening it. So that's, you know, it's really got a nail nick here for opening it. Do it either way, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. I'm really enthralled with the knife. Want to know more about it. I wish it would have had a date on it, even if that date was like 1982 or something. I'm not concerned as much about how old it is, though that would be neat to know. Maybe someone out there knows when they started dating these. Maybe these were made before 1952, and in, you know, maybe in 1952 they started dating them, or maybe they didn't start dating them until like 1970 or something like that. I would be keen to know if that's the case, or if you know, they continue to make these knives after 1983, and they continue to stamp them KL, but they were made in the civilian market or something like that. You know, kind of like the way Wenger has the soldier's model, or whatever they call it, that was made after, you know, the 71, I think, or is it the I don't know the number anymore. Jeez. Should have been better prepared for that part. But we do know that at a certain point, Wenger started making the soldier model along with, well, let me grab it. So here we have a Wenger that is actually the Swiss soldier's knife. And we can see here, you know, the stamp here. And then on the back side, it says 79. So it is dated. You know, this is a soldier's knife because it's also got the Waffen mark there. But Wenger made one with a hollow rivet through there. At a certain time, I think Victorinox also made a few with the hollow rivet. But eventually, the Swiss soldier's knife, they no longer had to put the Waffen number on there, because they just accepted that the knives were being made beyond the quality that the Swiss government was expecting for their knives. And so they stopped putting the Waffen mark on there, but they did continue to put a date on there. So this is a Victorinox from 1999. I think in 2003, I think in 2003 they adopted a different knife or something like that. But in any case, at some point, Wenger also made their knife for the civilian market, and you can see a slightly different shield, not much different, but slightly different. But the big difference is they no longer have a date on the back. If it doesn't have a date, then it was made for the civilian market, and they also put a bail in there, a removable bail into the rivet. So that was the big difference between their civilian model that they started making after these knives left service. So did the Dutch Army do something similar with this knife, where they continue to make it, or did Dutch knife companies continue to make this knife after it left Dutch Army service, but then you would not see a date on them? I don't know. So I don't know when this knife was really made. I'm hoping that it falls somewhere into the time that this knife was actually produced by the Dutch Army. I'm hoping that the Dutch Army did not always date these knives, and that would be really cool to know. But I do know that this knife, or a knife similar to this, served with the Dutch Army from 1952 to around 1983. And this was known as the M1952 Dutch Army knife. In any case, that's all I really know. If anyone out there knows more about these particular knives, I would really like to know. With that said, I will leave you with a slideshow. Hope you enjoyed this. I know I got more questions than answers, but it's really a cool knife. I don't know what else to say. Let me take just a second to thank you once again for dropping by and spending a few minutes here at Knife Chats with Tobias. I really do appreciate it, and I do appreciate any comments that you leave. So please remember to give me that thumbs up, and also don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you'll know when the next episode is up and running. Thanks again for dropping by. Really do appreciate your time here.